Welcome to Fireside Mysteries. Tonight, we venture into London's glittering theatrical world, where masks hide more than faces, and applause drowns out whispers of deadly intent. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, finds himself drawn into a world of greasepaint and glamour when a celebrated actress begs for his protection. But even Poirot cannot anticipate the tragedy that awaits behind the velvet curtains of high society. Join us for Death Wears a Disguise, a tale of obsession, hidden identities, and murder most theatrical, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the curtain rise. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The fog rolled through Mayfair like a grey silk curtain, muffling the clatter of hansoms and lending an air of theatrical mystery to the November evening. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat opposite my dear friend Hercule Poirot in the sitting room of his Whitehaven Mansion's flat, watching him arrange his collection of porcelain boxes with geometric precision. "Hastings," Poirot murmured without looking up, "you fidget like a schoolboy awaiting punishment. What troubles you?" "Nothing troubles me," I replied, perhaps too quickly. "I merely wonder if we shall spend the entire evening watching you align ornaments." Poirot's magnificent moustache twitched with amusement. "The symmetry! It soothes the mind, mon ami. And a soothed mind is a receptive mind." He adjusted one final box, a Sèvres piece decorated with pastoral scenes, precisely 1 centimetre to the left. Voila! Perfection. I was formulating a response when the doorbell rang with unusual urgency. Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally, and he consulted his pocket watch. 7:30. We expect no visitors. His green eyes gleamed with sudden interest. How delightful! The unexpected, it is the spice of existence. Moments later, his valet George appeared in the doorway, his expression maintaining its customary impassivity, despite the apparent agitation of our visitor. "A Miss Vivienne Delacourt to see you, sir. She insists the matter is most urgent." Poirot's eyes widened perceptibly. "Vivienne Delacourt, the actress. The same, sir." Even I, whose theatrical knowledge was admittedly limited, recognized the name. Vivienne Delacourt was the toast of the West End, celebrated for her performances in everything from Shakespeare to modern drama. Her photograph graced magazine covers. Her name filled theatre marquees. She was, by all accounts, the most acclaimed actress of her generation. "Show her in, Georges, at once." The woman who swept into Poirot's sitting room was precisely as beautiful as her photograph suggested, yet somehow more compelling in person. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair arranged in elaborate waves and eyes of such striking violet that I initially suspected theatrical enhancement. She wore a travelling coat of deep burgundy velvet, and her gloved hands clutched a small beaded bag, as though it contained her very soul. "Monsieur Poirot." Her voice carried the trained resonance of the stage, yet trembled slightly beneath its polish. "Forgive this intrusion. I had nowhere else to turn." Poirot rose and offered a small bow. "Mademoiselle Delacourt, your presence honours my humble rooms. Please sit. You are distressed. This much is evident. Georges shall bring tisane, and you shall tell Hercule Poirot everything." She sank into the offered chair with the graceful economy of movement that marked her profession. I noticed her fingers continued to work at the clasp of her bag, opening and closing it in a rhythm of barely contained anxiety. "I am being threatened, Monsieur Poirot. Someone wishes me harm, perhaps wishes me dead. These threats, Poirot said, settling into his own chair and steepling his fingers. They take what form? Miss Delacourt opened her bag and withdrew 3 folded papers. Her hands shook as she passed them across. These arrived over the past fortnight, 1 each week without fail. Poirot unfolded them with care, and I moved to read over his shoulder. Each note was composed of words and letters cut from newspapers and magazines, arranged in crude sentences. The mask will fall, your performance ends soon. Death wears a disguise, like you, troubling, Poirot murmured, examining the paper itself. Cheap stock, available anywhere. The words are cut from the Times, the Illustrated London News, and, he paused, lifting the paper to his nose. There is a faint scent. Greasepaint, perhaps, the theatrical kind. Miss Delacourt's violet eyes widened. I hadn't noticed, but yes, now that you mention it, the smell of the theatre. Someone from your world, then. The stage. Poirot set the notes aside. Tell me, mademoiselle, who might wish you such ill? She laughed, though there was no mirth in it. In the theatre, Monsieur Poirot, jealousy is as common as applause. Every actress has rivals. Every success breeds resentment. Yet you came to me. This suggests you suspect someone particular. Miss Delacourt hesitated. For a moment, the actress's mask slipped, and I glimpsed genuine fear beneath. This Saturday, Sir Edmund Ashworth is hosting a masquerade ball at his Belgravia mansion. A celebration of my 10 years upon the London stage. All of theatrical society will attend. Sir Edmund Ashworth, I interjected. The theatrical patron? The same, Miss Delacourt nodded. He has been a great supporter of my career. He financed my first major production and has championed me ever since. A shadow crossed her features. He is also hosting this ball against my explicit wishes. I begged him to cancel, given these threats. He refused. Poirot's moustache twitched thoughtfully. Sir Edmund, he is a man accustomed to having his way, no? Sir Edmund is accustomed to owning everything he touches, Miss Delacourt replied, and there was an edge to her voice that spoke of complicated history. His patronage comes with expectations. I see. Poirot's tone conveyed understanding beyond the words. And you fear this ball will provide opportunity for your threatener to act? A masquerade, Monsieur Poirot. Everyone in masks, everyone in disguise. She leaned forward, her eyes imploring. What better venue for murder? Poirot was silent for a long moment, his grey cells visibly at work behind those sharp eyes. Finally, he spoke. Tell me of those who will attend, those who might harbour resentment. Miss Delacourt drew a breath. Marcus Crane, my leading man in The Tempest's Edge. He believes I deliberately overshadow him, which is absurd. I simply perform as the role demands. We argued publicly last week. He said, she faltered, he said he wished me gone from the production, permanently. Anyone else? Sylvia Morehouse. She was Sir Edmund's previous favourite. The word carried weight. When his attention shifted to championing my career, she was cast aside. Her own career has suffered considerably since. And she blames you for this decline? Publicly and viciously. She told a reporter from the Herald that I had stolen everything that should have been hers. Poirot nodded slowly. Continue. There is also Philip Crane, Marcus's younger brother. He serves as Sir Edmund's personal secretary. A quiet, efficient young man. I cannot imagine him involved, yet, she trailed off. Yet. He watches me when he thinks I don't notice. There is something in his gaze that I cannot read. She shuddered delicately. It unnerves me. Anyone from the production itself? Stage crew, perhaps? Miss Delacourt considered this. Harriet Webb is our costume designer. She has been with every production I've ever done. Since my very first role. A mousy creature, devoted to her work, I cannot imagine. You must imagine everything, mademoiselle. Poirot interrupted gently. In the theatre of murder, the most unlikely player may take centre stage. There is also Edward Blackwood, the director, brilliant but temperamental. He and Sir Edmund clashed terribly over artistic decisions. Sir Edmund threatened to withdraw his funding entirely. And Sir Edmund himself? Poirot asked. You say he insisted upon this ball despite your protests. Is there tension between you? The silence that followed spoke volumes. Miss Delacourt's gaze dropped to her hands. Sir Edmund has been persistent in his personal attentions. I have consistently declined them. He does not accept rejection gracefully. I see. Poirot's voice was carefully neutral. And does he know something, perhaps, that you would prefer remain hidden? Miss Delacourt's head snapped up, her violet eyes flashing with sudden alarm. What do you mean? These threats speak of masks falling, performances ending. They suggest secrets, mademoiselle. If Hercule Poirot is to protect you, he must know what secrets might be exposed. For a long moment, she simply stared at him. Then, slowly, the fight drained from her posture. There is something, from many years ago, before I became Vivienne Delacourt, before the fame, the acclaim. She twisted her gloved hands. I am not who the world believes me to be. Few of us are, mademoiselle. My real name is not Vivienne Delacourt. I was born Violet Marsh, in a village in Cornwall. My father was a drunkard. My mother died when I was 12. I ran away to London at 16, reinvented myself entirely. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. There was also a marriage, brief and disastrous. I was 17, foolish. He was violent. I fled, told no one. Built my life as though Violet Marsh had never existed. And this husband? Dead. These 10 years now. Or so I believed. Her hands trembled visibly. Recently, I received a letter, not threatening, merely informative. Someone knows. Someone has discovered that Vivienne Delacourt and Violet Marsh are the same woman. This letter, you still have it? She shook her head. I burned it. Foolish, I know, but I panicked. Poirot absorbed this information with his characteristic stillness. And if this secret were revealed, what would be the consequence? Scandal? Perhaps ruin? The theatrical world forgives many sins, but deception of this magnitude? She laughed bitterly. My entire identity is built upon a lie, Monsieur Poirot. Everything I have achieved would be called into question. And Sir Edmund, he knows of this? The guilty flicker in her eyes was answer enough. He discovered it somehow, 6 months ago. Since then, his attentions have become more insistent, his implications more pointed. He blackmails you. He has never said so directly. He is too clever for that. But the threat hangs between us, unspoken. Poirot rose from his chair and paced to the window, his small, precise steps carrying him through the pools of lamplight. When he turned, his expression was grave. Mademoiselle Delacourt, or should I say Mademoiselle Marsh, you present me with a most intriguing puzzle, threatening letters that smell of greasepaint, a masquerade ball where any enemy might strike unseen, a powerful man who holds your secrets, rivals who wish you ill. He paused, his moustache bristling with determination. Hercule Poirot accepts your case. Relief flooded her features. You will attend the ball? I shall, and my good friend Hastings also. He glanced at me with a slight smile. We shall be, as you theatrical folks say, in the wings, watching, waiting. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Do not thank me yet, mademoiselle. The performance, as they say, has not yet begun. His eyes grew distant, contemplative. Tell me, this masquerade ball. The masks they are provided? Yes. Sir Edmund commissioned them specially. Elaborate creations, each unique. They were designed to match our costumes. Designed by whom? Harriet Webb, the costume designer I mentioned. She created everything, costumes, masks, the entire visual spectacle. Interesting, Poirot murmured. Most interesting indeed. After Miss Delacourt departed, somewhat calmer, though still visibly anxious, Poirot stood motionless by the window, watching the fog swirl through the Mayfair streets. What do you make of it, Hastings? A dangerous situation, I replied. This masquerade provides perfect cover for anyone wishing her harm. The jealous rivals, the spurned actress, the blackmailing patron, any of them might strike. Indeed, and yet, Poirot turned, his expression troubled. There is something she has not told us, mon ami. Something she holds back, even now. You believe she's lying? I believe she has told us truth wrapped in omission. The little grey cells, they sense incompleteness. He moved to collect the threatening letters from the table, examining them once more. These words, death wears a disguise, like you. The threatener knows her secret, knows that Vivienne Delacourt is a mask worn by Violet Marsh. Then the threatener must be someone close to her, someone who discovered her past. Or someone who knew Violet Marsh before she became Vivienne Delacourt. Poirot's eyes gleamed. We must learn more about this village in Cornwall, Hastings, about the marriage she fled, about the people she left behind. And in the meantime, we attend a masquerade ball. His moustache curved in what might have been a smile. I confess I do not care for masks. They offend the sense of order. And yet, he paused, gazing at the threatening letters, this case, it demands we enter the world of disguise. To find truth, sometimes one must first embrace illusion. He carefully folded the letters and placed them in his breast pocket. Saturday night, Hastings. We shall watch the theatre world play at masquerade. And somewhere among the dancers, hiding behind silk and sequins, a potential murderer waits. His voice dropped grave and certain. Hercule Poirot shall be watching, and the little grey cells, they never blink. Chapter 2. Behind the Mask. The Ashworth mansion blazed with light against the November darkness, its Georgian facade transformed into something from a fever dream. Torches lined the curved driveway, their flames dancing in the chill wind, and through the tall windows I could glimpse the swirl of colour and movement within. Quite the spectacle, I remarked, as our taxi joined the queue of motor cars and hansoms depositing guests at the marble steps. Poirot, immaculate in evening dress, adjusted the black silk mask that covered the upper portion of his face. He had accepted the disguise with visible reluctance, complaining that it interfered with the proper grooming of his moustache. The spectacle, Hastings, it is precisely the point. When all the world wears masks, the true face becomes invisible. His green eyes glittered through the mask's eye-holes. We must watch not for what people show, but for what they cannot hide. We ascended the steps and entered a world of calculated fantasy. The grand foyer had been transformed into a Venetian carnival, with silk drapes in crimson and gold cascading from the ceiling, and enormous arrangements of black feathers and roses adorning every surface. Liveried footmen in matching golden masks directed guests toward the ballroom. Their movements synchronized with unsettling precision, Sir Edmund spares no expense, I observed. Sir Edmund wishes to impress, to own, to control. Poirot's voice carried an edge of distaste. This is celebration of Mademoiselle Delacour's career. It is also a demonstration of his power over her. We passed through an archway draped in black velvet and emerged into the ballroom proper. Here the effect was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across a sea of masked dancers, their costumes ranging from the elegantly restrained to the fantastically elaborate. An orchestra played from a raised platform, their instruments gleaming, the musicians themselves masked in silver. "There," Poirot murmured, tilting his head toward the far end of the room. I followed his gaze to a raised dais where a throne-like chair had been positioned. Upon it sat Vivienne Delacourt, resplendent in a gown of deep violet silk that matched her eyes. Her mask was a masterwork of craft, a butterfly design in purple and silver, with delicate wire antennae that trembled with her every movement. Diamonds glittered at her throat and in her dark hair. She looked, I thought, like a queen holding court. But even from this distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her gloved fingers gripped the armrests of her throne. "She is afraid," Poirot observed quietly. "Behind the mask of triumph, the fear remains." A figure approached the dais, a tall man in an elaborate costume of black and gold, his mask fashioned to resemble a lion's face. He bowed theatrically before Miss Delacourt, then took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Sir Edmund Ashworth, I presume," I said. "Undoubtedly. The lion, it suits him. A predator who believes himself king of all he surveys." We watched as Sir Edmund led Miss Delacourt from her throne to the dance floor. Other couples parted to give them space, and the orchestra shifted to a waltz. They moved together with practiced grace, yet there was something in their postures that suggested tension rather than harmony. A puppet and puppeteer, perhaps, though which was which remained unclear. "Come, Hastings, we must circulate. Observe, the little grey cells, they require data." We moved through the crowd, pausing occasionally to accept champagne from passing waiters, or to admire particularly striking costumes. Poirot, despite his complaints about the mask, proved remarkably adept at navigating the social currents of the ball. Near the orchestra platform, we encountered a man in a harlequin costume, his diamond-patterned suit of red and black topped by a half-mask with an exaggerated smile. He stood apart from the dancers, a champagne glass clutched in his hand, his gaze fixed upon the waltzing couple with unmistakable hostility. "Marcus Crane," Poirot murmured, "the jealous leading man." As if sensing our attention, Crane turned. His eyes behind the smiling mask were anything but amused. "Enjoying the circus?" he asked, his voice carrying the rich timbre of a trained actor. "Sir Edmund does love to put on a show, especially when it involves parading his possessions." "You refer to Mademoiselle Delacour?" Poirot inquired mildly. Crane's laugh was bitter. "I refer to all of us. Every actor. Every artist who has ever accepted Edmund Ashworth's patronage. We're all his possessions in the end, dancing when he commands, performing for his amusement." He drained his champagne in a single swallow. "But some of us grow tired of dancing. You sound most discontented, monsieur." "Discontented?" Crane's masked face turned fully toward Poirot. "I am an artist, sir. I have given 15 years to the stage, honed my craft, sacrificed everything for my art. And what recognition do I receive? I am eternally Vivienne Delacour's leading man." a supporting player in her endless triumph. His voice rose slightly. She steals every scene, demands every spotlight. And Edmund, he gestured violently toward the dance floor. Edmund encourages it, finances it, worships it. Perhaps Mademoiselle Delacour is simply the superior performer, I suggested somewhat tartly. Crane's eyes blazed behind his mask. Perhaps Mademoiselle Delacour is simply better at playing games, at wearing masks. He laughed again, harsh and humourless. Though after tonight, perhaps some masks will finally fall. Before either of us could respond, he turned and stalked away, disappearing into the crowd of dancers. A man consumed by resentment, I observed, and by something else, Poirot murmured thoughtfully. Did you notice, Hastings, how his anger focused not only upon Miss Delacour, but upon Sir Edmund? The greater fury, it was directed at the patron rather than the rival. Jealousy takes many forms. Indeed it does, mon ami. Indeed it does. We continued our circuit of the ballroom. Near the refreshment tables, we encountered a woman in an elaborate peacock costume, her mask adorned with actual feathers that fanned around her face. She was beautiful, in a sharp, angular way, and her posture radiated calculated elegance and barely concealed venom. Sylvia Morehouse, Poirot identified quietly, the former favourite. As we watched, Miss Morehouse intercepted a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. She took 2 glasses, then turned to survey the room with predatory attention. Her gaze settled upon the dance floor, where Sir Edmund still guided Miss Delacour through the steps of a second waltz. "Quite the display of devotion," she remarked, apparently to no one, though loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "One wonders how long it will last. Edmund's enthusiasms are notoriously temporary." A gentleman in a domino mask approached her. "Sylvia, darling, you really mustn't." "Mustn't what? Speak the truth." Miss Morehouse's laugh was like cut glass. "Everyone knows Vivienne Delacour is Edmund's latest acquisition, and everyone knows what happens to his acquisitions when he tires of them." She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast toward the dancing couple. "Enjoy it while it lasts, darling. The fall is always harder when you've climbed so high." The gentleman in the domino mask, a slender, serious-looking young man, attempted to take her arm. "Please, Miss Morehouse, this isn't the place." "And who are you to tell me what place is appropriate?" She shook off his hand. "Run along, Philip. Fetch your master another drink. That's what you're best at, isn't it?" Fetching and carrying for Edmund Ashworth. The young man, Philip Crane, I realized, the secretary, withdrew with visible embarrassment, his cheeks flushing beneath his mask. "Interesting," Poirot murmured as we moved away. "The secretary, he attempts to manage Miss Morehouse's outbursts. One wonders at his motivation. Simple professional concern, perhaps. He works for Sir Edmund. Perhaps." But Poirot's tone suggested doubt. We made our way toward the edges of the ballroom, where a series of alcoves provided refuge from the noise and movement of the dance. In one such alcove, partially hidden by a curtain of black silk, we discovered a slight woman in a simple dove-grey costume. Her mask was equally understated, a plain silver domino that covered only her eyes. She sat alone, a sketchbook open on her lap, her pencil moving with rapid, precise strokes. "Mademoiselle Webb, I presume," Poirot said softly, approaching the alcove. The woman started, her pencil jerking across the page. She looked up at us with wide, startled eyes. I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "I am Hercule Poirot. This is my colleague, Captain Hastings." Poirot offered a small bow. "I understand you designed the magnificent costumes for this evening's entertainment." A flush of pleasure crossed her plain features. "You're too kind. It was nothing, really. Sir Edmund provided the resources. I merely executed the vision. The masks especially are most impressive. Each one unique, each one perfectly suited to its wearer." Poirot's gaze was sharp despite his casual tone. "You must know these players well, to capture their essences so precisely." Miss Webb's pencil resumed its movement across the page. "I've worked with most of them for years. You learn to see people, in my profession, to understand what they want to project, what they want to hide." "And what does Mademoiselle Delacour wish to hide, do you think?" The pencil stopped. Miss Webb's eyes behind her simple mask grew guarded. Miss Delacourt is a consummate professional. She projects exactly what she intends to project, nothing more. Her voice had cooled considerably. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the performers. The midnight unmasking approaches, and there are adjustments to be made." She gathered her sketchbook and departed with quick, economical movements. I caught a glimpse of her drawing as she passed, a sketch of Vivienne Delacour on her throne, rendered with remarkable skill, and an intensity of detail that seemed almost obsessive. "The quiet ones. Hastings," Poirot observed. "They see much, they say little, and they feel, perhaps, more deeply than we imagine." The orchestra paused, and a ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Sir Edmund Ashworth had ascended the dais, his lion's mask pushed up onto his forehead to reveal a handsome, commanding face with cold blue eyes. He raised his hands for attention. "My friends," his voice boomed across the ballroom, "the hour approaches when masks shall fall and truth shall be revealed. But first, a toast." He gestured, and a footman appeared with a silver tray bearing 2 crystal glasses, filled with deep amber liquid. "To Vivienne Delacour, 10 years of brilliance upon our London stage. May her star never dim, and may she remain forever." His eyes found hers with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Under my most devoted protection." He handed one glass to Miss Delacourt, keeping the other for himself. The ballroom echoed with applause as they raised their glasses. And then Sir Edmund Ashworth drank. The change was not immediate. He completed his toast, accepted the accolades of the crowd, and descended from the dais to resume his circuit of the room. But Poirot, I noticed, had grown very still. "Something is wrong," he murmured. "What do you mean?" "Sir Edmund, watch him." I focused my attention on the lion-masked patron as he moved through his guests. At first, I noticed nothing amiss. But then I saw it. A slight unsteadiness in his gait, a tremor in the hand that held his champagne glass. "He appears unwell," I said. "More than unwell, Hastings. Far more." Sir Edmund had stopped walking. His hand rose to his throat, and his face, what I could see of it beneath the pushed-back mask, had taken on a greyish pallor. He swayed, reached out as if seeking support, and found none. "Edmund!" someone called out, concern penetrating the festive noise. Sir Edmund Ashworth fell. The crash of his body against the parquet floor silenced the orchestra mid-note. For a moment, the entire ballroom froze, a tableau of masked figures caught in attitudes of shock and horror. Then the screaming began. Poirot moved with surprising speed for a man of his sedentary habits, pushing through the crowd with sharp commands of "Make way! Make way!" I followed in his wake, and within moments we had reached the fallen man. Sir Edmund lay on his back, his lion's mask askew, his face now a terrible shade of purple. His mouth worked soundlessly, and his eyes, those cold blue eyes, bulged with terror and confusion. Foam flecked his lips. Poison, Poirot said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. He has been poisoned. A doctor! Someone shouted. Fetch a doctor! But even as the cry went up, I knew it was too late. I had seen men die before, in the war, and I recognized the signs. Sir Edmund Ashworth's heels drummed briefly against the floor. His back arched, and then, with a final, rattling exhalation, he went still. Hercule Poirot reached down and closed the staring eyes. "He is dead," he announced. "Murdered here, before our eyes, and somewhere in this room." His gaze swept across the sea of masked faces. "The killer stands among us." Pandemonium erupted. Guests pressed toward the doors, only to find them blocked by footmen who had received swift instructions from someone with presence of mind. Women wept, men shouted. The orchestra sat frozen with instruments still raised. And in the centre of it all, on her throne of velvet and gilt, Vivienne Delacourt sat motionless. Her butterfly mask hid her expression, but her hands, those expressive hands that had moved audiences to tears, gripped the armrests so tightly that her knuckles showed white through her gloves. Poirot's eyes found hers across the chaos. "The performance," he murmured, too softly for anyone but me to hear, "has taken a most unexpected turn. The victim becomes the patron. The threatener remains unknown. And the masks," he glanced at the fallen lion's face of Sir Edmund's costume, "they have begun to fall." He straightened his own mask with careful precision. "Come, Hastings, the investigation, it begins now. And the clock," he nodded toward the grand timepiece above the ballroom doors, its hands pointing to 11:30. "It counts the minutes until midnight. When all masks are scheduled to be removed, we must ensure that the mask of murder is removed as well." He stepped over Sir Edmund's body with the delicacy of a cat, his little grey cells already churning behind those bright, watchful eyes. Chapter 3. Unmasking the Players. The library of Ashworth House had been commandeered as Poirot's base of operations. It was a handsome room, lined with leather-bound volumes that I suspected had never been read, their spines too pristine, their arrangement too perfect. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting flickering shadows across the Persian carpet. Inspector Jameson of Scotland Yard had arrived within the hour, a stocky, red-faced man with the harried expression of someone whose evening had been thoroughly ruined. He stood by the fireplace now, consulting his notebook with evident frustration. "Poison, you say? The police surgeon confirms it, some manner of fast-acting toxin, though he cannot yet identify the specific compound." Jameson shook his head. "Administered how? That's the question." The man drank a toast in full view of 200 witnesses. "Précisément," Poirot murmured from his position in a wing-back chair. He had finally removed his mask, and his fingers now worked to restore his moustache to its proper magnificence. 200 witnesses, and yet no one saw the murder committed. This suggests either remarkable sleight of hand, or that the poison was administered before the toast. "Before?" Jameson frowned. "But he showed no symptoms until after he drank. Some poisons, they are slow to manifest. The timing of symptoms does not always indicate the timing of ingestion." Poirot steepled his fingers. "We must examine every possibility. The glass from which Sir Edmund drank, it has been secured. Bagged and sent for analysis, along with the decanter and the remaining glasses on the tray. Excellent. And the footman who served the toast? Being held in the servants' hall. Name of Thomas Briggs. 20 years in Sir Edmund's service. No apparent motive. Thoroughly terrified." Poirot nodded slowly. "We shall speak with him, But first, the guests. They remain confined to the ballroom. As you requested. Though I warn you, Monsieur Poirot, the natives are growing restless. Half of London society is in that room, and they're not accustomed to being treated like suspects. Tonight, Inspector, they are all suspects, until Hercule Poirot determines otherwise. He rose from his chair with sudden energy. Come, Hastings, we shall begin the interviews. The masks have been removed. Now we must see what faces lie beneath. The first to be summoned was Vivienne Delacourt herself. She entered the library with the measured grace of a woman accustomed to commanding attention, though her violet eyes were rimmed with red, and her famous composure showed visible cracks. Mademoiselle, Poirot gestured to a chair opposite his own. Please sit. You have endured a terrible shock. A shock? She laughed, though the sound was hollow. The man who held my secrets, my career, my very identity in his hands, dead at my feet. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, one might call that a shock. You do not seem entirely grieved by his passing. Her eyes flashed. Should I pretend emotions I do not feel? Edmund Ashworth was my patron, yes. He was also my jailer. His death frees me from a prison of his making. She paused, her expression hardening. But I did not kill him, if that is your implication. I imply nothing, mademoiselle. I merely observe. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Tell me of the toast. The glasses. Who prepared them? I don't know. A footman brought them on a tray. Edmund handed one to me, kept the other for himself. And you drank from yours? A sip only. The brandy was too strong for my taste. Yet you show no ill effects. Miss Delacourt's face paled. You think the poison was meant for me? I think nothing yet. I gather information. Poirot's gaze was steady. The glass Sir Edmund gave you, was it a random selection, or did he choose specifically? She frowned, clearly trying to remember. He took them both from the tray, handed me the one in his left hand, kept the one in his right. Her voice trembled slightly. They looked identical. Crystal glasses, amber liquid. I couldn't tell them apart. And Sir Edmund, did he examine the glasses before choosing? No, he simply took them and... She trailed off, her eyes widening with sudden realization. You think someone switched them? That I was the intended victim? It is one possibility among several. Poirot sat back. Tell me, mademoiselle, in the hours before the ball, did you notice anything unusual? Anyone behaving strangely? Miss Delacourt pressed her fingers to her temples. Everyone was behaving strangely. The tension was unbearable. Marcus glaring daggers at Edmund. Sylvia making poisonous remarks to anyone who would listen. Philip hovering about, watching everything with those strange, intense eyes of his. And Miss Webb, the costume designer? Harriet. Miss Delacourt seemed surprised by the question. She was in the dressing rooms making last-minute adjustments to the costumes. I barely saw her before the ball began. She designed your mask, did she not? The butterfly? Yes. She designs all my costumes, all my masks. Has done for 10 years. A flicker of something, affection, guilt, crossed her features. Harriet is utterly devoted. She would never harm me. And Sir Edmund? Would she harm him? The question clearly caught Miss Delacourt off guard. I don't know. Edmund was not always kind to those he considered beneath his notice. The servants, the craftspeople, he treated them as furniture. But Harriet never complained. The silent ones rarely do, Poirot murmured. Thank you, mademoiselle. You may return to the ballroom. But please, do not leave the house. After she departed, Poirot sat in contemplative silence for a long moment. What do you make of her, Hastings? She seems genuinely shaken, and the possibility that she was the intended victim is worth considering, yes, but we must not leap to conclusions." He rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded gardens. The glass Sir Edmund handed her, the glass he kept for himself, were they truly interchangeable? Or did someone ensure that a specific glass reached a specific target? You mean the killer might have known which glass was poisoned? I mean, mon ami, that we must examine every possibility with equal rigour. Now, let us speak with the jealous leading man. Marcus Crane entered the library with the theatrical swagger of a man accustomed to making entrances. His harlequin costume had been partially dismantled, the jacket removed, the mask discarded, but his manner remained that of a performer playing to an audience. "Monsieur Poirot, I've heard of you, of course, the great detective." He sprawled into the indicated chair with calculated insouciance. "I suppose you think I killed Edmund." "And did you, Monsieur Crane?" "I wanted to. God knows, I've dreamed of it often enough." Crane's smile was sharp and humourless. The man was a tyrant, a petty, controlling tyrant who used his money to manipulate everyone around him. But wanting and doing are different things, aren't they? Indeed they are. Where were you when Sir Edmund drank the fatal toast? On the dance floor, watching the spectacle like everyone else. I had just finished a very unsatisfying conversation with my brother. Your brother? Philip Crane, Sir Edmund's secretary? The same. Crane's expression soured. Philip has worked for Edmund for 5 years now. 5 years of fetching and carrying, of being treated like a servant despite his education and breeding. I've begged him to leave, to find a position worthy of his talents. He refuses. Why? Crane was silent for a moment, and something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like pain. I don't know. Loyalty, perhaps, or fear. Edmund had a way of making people feel they couldn't survive without him. And you, Monsieur Crane? Did Sir Edmund make you feel this way? Edmund made me feel like a trained monkey, performing for treats. The bitterness in his voice was raw and genuine. Every role I've taken in the past 5 years has been at his discretion. Every production, every casting decision, all filtered through his patronage. Cross Edmund Ashworth, and your career in London theatre is finished. Yet you did cross him. I am told you threatened Miss Delacourt publicly, wished her gone permanently. Crane had the grace to look embarrassed. A moment of temper. The rehearsals had been brutal, and Vivienne, he hesitated. Vivienne is a magnificent actress, truly, but she consumes every scene she's in. There's no room for anyone else to breathe. You resented her success. I resented being invisible. His voice dropped. 15 years on the stage, and I'm still Vivienne Delacour's leading man. Not Marcus Crane, the actor. Just her accessory. And now that Sir Edmund is dead, what becomes of the production? Of Miss Delacourt's career? Crane's expression shifted. A flicker of calculation quickly suppressed. I don't know. Edmund's money funded everything. Without his patronage. He shrugged elaborately. Perhaps the playing field becomes more level. Or perhaps, Poirot observed quietly, someone else steps in to fill the void. Someone who inherits Sir Edmund's wealth and influence. Crane went very still. I wouldn't know anything about that. Would you not? Poirot's gaze was penetrating. Thank you, Monsieur Crane. That will be all for now. Sylvia Morehouse swept into the library like a storm front, her peacock feathers still trembling with indignation. This is outrageous, she declared before Poirot could speak. being held like a common criminal. I have connections, Monsieur Poirot, powerful connections. And yet, mademoiselle, those connections cannot exempt you from a murder investigation." Poirot's tone was mild but unyielding. "Please, sit." She sat, but with an air of conferring a great favour. "Where were you when Sir Edmund collapsed?" "By the refreshment tables. I had just finished a glass of champagne." "Alone?" Philip Crane was nearby, making a nuisance of himself as usual. Her lip curled. "The boy is pathetically devoted to Edmund. Was, I should say. One wonders what will become of him now. You do not seem distressed by Sir Edmund's death. Should I be?" Her eyes glittered with malice. "Edmund discarded me like a worn glove when Vivienne caught his eye. 5 years of devotion, of supporting his theatrical ambitions, she caught herself, of friendship, thrown away without a second thought." "You loved him?" The question hit its mark. For just a moment, Sylvia Morehouse's brittle facade cracked, and I glimpsed something raw and wounded beneath. "I loved what I thought he was, what he pretended to be." Her voice hardened. "I learned better." "And this resentment, did it extend to Miss Delacourt?" "Vivienne is a symptom, not the disease. Edmund would have found another favourite eventually. He always did." She laughed bitterly, though I confess, watching her supplant me was particularly galling. Such talent wasted on a woman with so many secrets. Poirot leaned forward. "Secrets, mademoiselle? What secrets?" Sylvia's smile turned sly. "Oh, I've heard whispers. Everyone has. The great Vivienne Delacourt isn't quite who she claims to be. A past she's buried. A name she's discarded." She examined her fingernails with studied casualness. "Edmund knew, of course. He made it his business to know everything about his investments. And you, do you know the specifics of these secrets?" "I know enough." Her eyes met Poirot's. "Enough to destroy her, if I chose." "But where's the satisfaction in that? I prefer to watch her destroy herself." Poirot regarded her steadily. "You are aware, mademoiselle, that threatening statements do not serve you well in a murder investigation?" "I'm threatening no one." She rose, smoothing her peacock skirts. "I'm merely observing that masks have a way of slipping. Edmund learned that tonight. Perhaps Vivienne will learn it too." She swept out without waiting for dismissal. Poirot sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "A viper's nest, Hastings, each of them with motive, each with grievance." He shook his head slowly. "And yet the mechanics of the murder remain unclear. How was the poison administered? Who ensured it reached Sir Edmund specifically? The footman, perhaps? Thomas Briggs? Perhaps. We must speak with him." Poirot rose, his expression grave. "But first, the quiet ones, the secretary who watches, the costume designer who sees. They interest me greatly. Hastings. For it is often in the wings, not on the stage, that the true drama unfolds." He straightened his waistcoat with precise movements. "The little grey cells, they sense something hidden in this house. A truth wearing its own disguise. And Hercule Poirot will not rest until every mask has fallen." Chapter 4. The Understudy's Shadow. The servants' hall was a stark contrast to the opulence above. Plain whitewashed walls, scrubbed wooden tables, and the lingering smell of polish and coal smoke. Thomas Briggs, the footman who had served the fatal toast, sat hunched on a wooden bench, his livery rumpled, his powdered wig askew. He was a man of perhaps 50, with the weathered face of one who had spent a lifetime in service, and his hands trembled visibly as Poirot approached. Monsieur Briggs. Poirot's voice was gentle, almost paternal. You have had a most distressing evening. I didn't do it, sir. The words tumbled out in a rush. 20 years I've served Sir Edmund. 20 years without a mark against my name. I would never, could never. Peace, monsieur! I do not accuse. I seek only to understand. Poirot settled onto the bench opposite, his manner deliberately unthreatening. Tell me of the glasses, the brandy for the toast. How was it prepared? Briggs swallowed hard, visibly attempting to compose himself. The brandy came from Sir Edmund's private stock. The 47 Armagnac, his favourite. I decanted it myself in the butler's pantry not an hour before the toast. You were alone during this preparation? Yes, sir. Mr. Carstairs, the butler, was overseeing arrangements in the ballroom. I prepared the tray, as I've done 100 times before. And the glasses? They were clean, undamaged? Crystal, sir, from the special service. I polished them myself. His voice cracked. There was nothing wrong with them. Nothing. Poirot leaned forward slightly. After you prepared the tray, where was it kept? On the sideboard in the butler's pantry, waiting for Sir Edmund's signal. And during this waiting period, did anyone enter the pantry? Did you leave the tray unattended at any moment? Briggs hesitated, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his weathered features. Monsieur Briggs, Poirot pressed gently, the truth, if you please. A man's life, and perhaps your own freedom, depends upon accuracy. I did step out, just for a moment. Briggs's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Miss Webb, the costume designer, she came to the servants' corridor. Said there was a problem with one of the masks. Needed me to fetch something from the storage room. I was gone perhaps 5 minutes, no more. Poirot's eyes sharpened, though his expression remained placid. Miss Webb sent you on this errand, and the tray was left unattended. The pantry door was closed, sir. Locked, I thought, but he trailed off miserably. But someone might have entered during your absence. Briggs nodded, his face a mask of anguish. I've thought of nothing else since Sir Edmund fell. If someone tampered with those glasses while I was gone, if I'm responsible, you are responsible only for answering my questions truthfully, monsieur. Poirot rose. This errand Miss Webb sent you upon, what was it precisely? She needed a particular thread. Gold silk, she said, for an emergency repair. I fetched it from the sewing storage in the basement. And when you returned? Miss Webb was gone. I delivered the thread to the dressing rooms, but she wasn't there either. One of the maids took it. Briggs shook his head. I thought nothing of it at the time. Miss Webb is always rushing about before performances, fixing this and adjusting that. I see. Poirot was silent for a moment, his grey cells visibly at work. One more question, Monsieur Briggs. When you carried the tray to Sir Edmund for the toast, did he examine the glasses? Did he seem to choose between them deliberately? He took them both at once, sir, one in each hand, gave the left one to Miss Delacourt, kept the right for himself. Briggs frowned. Though now that you mention it, yes. Sir Edmund did glance at the glasses before he picked them up. Just a quick look, like he was checking something. I thought he was admiring the crystal, but perhaps he was looking for a mark, a distinction between them. Poirot nodded slowly. Thank you, Monsieur Briggs. You have been most helpful. We found Philip Crane in a small sitting room off the main corridor, perched on the edge of a velvet settee, like a bird prepared for flight. He had removed his domino mask, revealing a pale, fine-featured face that bore little resemblance to his more flamboyant brother. Where Marcus was theatrical and bold, Philip seemed to have been designed for invisibility. The perfect quality, I reflected, for a secretary. Monsieur Crane. Poirot took the chair opposite, studying the young man with evident interest. You have served Sir Edmund for 5 years, I understand. 5 years and 3 months. Philip's voice was soft, carefully modulated. Since I left university. A long time to remain in such a position. A man of your education might have sought advancement elsewhere. Something flickered in Philip's pale eyes, pain perhaps, or resignation. Sir Edmund was not an easy man to leave. Your brother expressed similar sentiments. He said Sir Edmund had a way of making people feel they could not survive without him. Marcus understands nothing. The words came out sharper than Philip seemed to intend, and he quickly moderated his tone. My brother sees only what he wishes to see. He thinks I stayed out of weakness. He's wrong. Then why did you stay, monsieur? Philip was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his clasped hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because I loved him. The confession hung in the air like smoke. I felt my eyebrows rise involuntarily, but Poirot merely nodded, as though this revelation confirmed something he had already suspected. And Sir Edmund? Did he return this affection? Edmund returned nothing that did not serve his interests. Philip's laugh was bitter and hollow. He knew how I felt. He used it to ensure my loyalty, my discretion, my willingness to overlook his indiscretions. His relationships with Miss Morehouse, with Miss Delacourt, among others. Philip's jaw tightened. Edmund collected people, Monsieur Poirot, actresses, artists, anyone whose talent or beauty caught his eye. He displayed them like trophies, discarded them when they bored him. And I, his voice cracked, I watched it all, arranged his assignations, managed the aftermath when he tired of them. A painful position, you cannot imagine. Philip rose abruptly, moving to the window with jerky, agitated steps. Do you know what it is to love someone who sees you only as furniture? To be present for every intimate moment of their life, and yet be utterly invisible? I begin to understand, monsieur. Poirot's voice was surprisingly gentle. And tonight, the night of his death, where were you when the toast was made? By the refreshment tables, near Miss Morehouse. Philip's laugh was humourless. Another of Edmund's discarded trophies. We have that in common, at least. Did you observe anything unusual? Anyone approaching the dais, perhaps? Or behaving strangely? Philip turned from the window, his expression troubled. Everyone was behaving strangely. The tension in that room was suffocating. Marcus glaring at Vivienne, Sylvia making her poisonous remarks, and Harriet, Miss Webb. She was watching Vivienne. She's always watching Vivienne. Philip shook his head. I've never understood their relationship. Harriet has been with Vivienne since the beginning, before the fame, before Edmund. She's devoted to her completely. Obsessively, one might say. Obsessively, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. An interesting choice of word. It's the only accurate one. Harriet lives for Vivienne. Her entire existence revolves around making Vivienne beautiful, successful, protected. Philip paused, something shifting in his expression. Protected from anything. Or anyone, including Sir Edmund. The silence that followed was answer enough. Thank you, Monsieur Crane. Poirot rose. You have given me much to consider. We found Harriet Webb in the dressing rooms backstage, a labyrinth of mirrors, costume racks, and scattered theatrical paraphernalia. She sat at a workbench covered with fabric swatches and sewing implements, her hands busy with needle and thread, even as we entered. "Miss Webb." Poirot approached with his characteristic soft tread. "You work even now, after such a tragedy?" "Work calms me." Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. "It always has." "You have worked with Miss Delacourt for many years, I understand." 10 years, since her first professional role. Harriet's needle continued its rhythmic movement. I was the costume assistant at the Haymarket Theatre. Vivienne was a nobody then, a girl from Cornwall with more ambition than experience. I saw something in her, something extraordinary. And you have remained by her side ever since. She needed me. For the first time, emotion coloured Harriet's voice, a fierce, protective intensity. "The theatrical world is brutal, Monsieur Poirot, full of predators who would exploit a young woman's talent and beauty. Someone had to protect her." "Protect her from predators like Sir Edmund Ashworth?" Harriet's needle stopped mid-stitch. When she looked up, her eyes burned with barely contained fury. Edmund Ashworth was the worst of them all. He wrapped his exploitation in the language of patronage, but we all knew what he wanted. He owned people, Monsieur Poirot, bought their souls with his money and held them captive with his secrets. You knew about Miss Delacourt's secrets? Her true identity? I knew Violet Marsh before she became Vivienne Delacourt. Harriet's voice softened. I helped her become who she was meant to be. The past, that wretched village, that brutal marriage, none of it mattered. Vivienne was a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. She deserved to fly free. And Sir Edmund threatened that freedom. Sir Edmund threatened everything. Harriet set down her needle with deliberate precision. 6 months ago, he discovered the truth about Vivienne's past. Since then, he has used that knowledge to control her absolutely. Every performance, every public appearance, every private moment, all dictated by Edmund's desires. This must have been distressing for you to witness. Distressing? Harriet laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humour. I have watched the woman She caught herself. The woman I have devoted my life to serving, reduced to a puppet. Dancing whenever Edmund pulled her strings, and I could do nothing. Nothing but watch and wait and hope that somehow, some day, she would be free of him. And now she is free. Harriet met Poirot's gaze steadily. Yes, now she is free. You do not seem surprised by Sir Edmund's death, mademoiselle. I am surprised by nothing where Edmund Ashworth is concerned. The man made enemies everywhere he went. Someone was bound to strike eventually. Her expression remained impassive. I only regret that I was not the one to do it. A dangerous statement, mademoiselle. The truth often is. Poirot studied her for a long moment, his grey cells clearly churning behind those bright, observant eyes. The footman, Thomas Briggs, tells me you sent him on an errand shortly before the toast, to fetch gold silk thread from the storage room. For the first time I saw a flicker of something, surprise, alarm, cross Harriet's composed features. I needed the thread for a repair. One of the masks had a loose seam. Which mask? I don't recall precisely. There were several that needed attention. And yet the maid who received the thread from Briggs says you never collected it, that you were not in the dressing rooms when he returned. Harriet's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I was moving between locations. There was much to oversee. Indeed. Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. One more question, mademoiselle. The masks you designed for this evening, each was unique, you said. Each perfectly suited to its wearer. That is correct. Sir Edmund's lion mask, You created it specifically for him? I designed all the masks. Sir Edmund's was among them. And Miss Delacourt's butterfly? You crafted that as well? Of course. Every element of Vivienne's costume passes through my hands. I would trust no one else with her appearance. Poirot nodded slowly. The masks, they are worn close to the face, no? The interior surface touches the skin directly. Something shifted in Harriet's expression. A brief flash of wariness, quickly suppressed. Some masks do. Others have padding or lining for comfort. And Sir Edmund's mask, did it have such padding? I believe so. A thin layer of theatrical cotton against the inner surface. Standard practice for elaborate masks. Theatrical cotton. Poirot repeated the words thoughtfully. Which might absorb any substance applied to it. Which might transfer that substance to the skin of the wearer. Harriet's face went very still. I don't know what you're implying. I imply nothing, mademoiselle. I observe only. Poirot offered a small bow. Thank you for your time. You have been most illuminating. Outside in the corridor, Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, his fingers absently grooming his moustache. The pieces, Hastings. They begin to arrange themselves. You suspect Miss Webb? I suspect everyone, mon ami. It is the only safe position. He began walking toward the main house, his steps measured and precise. But Miss Webb, she interests me greatly. Her devotion to Miss Delacour is absolute. Obsessive, as Monsieur Philip Crane observed. Such devotion, it can inspire great acts of sacrifice. Or great acts of murder. Précisément. Poirot paused, his expression grave. The errand she sent Briggs upon, it created a window of opportunity. A window during which the glasses could have been tampered with. And her knowledge of theatrical materials, greasepaint, makeup, substances that might be absorbed through the skin. You think the poison was in the mask, not the brandy? I think, Hastings, that we have been looking at this crime from the wrong angle entirely. His eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. The toast, the brandy, the glasses, they are misdirection. The true method, it lies elsewhere. And the little grey cells, they begin to perceive its shape. He quickened his pace. Come, Hastings, we must examine that mask before someone thinks to dispose of the evidence. Chapter 5. Threads of Deception. The evidence room had been hastily established in Sir Edmund's private study, a masculine space of dark oak panelling and hunting prints, now transformed into a repository of potential murder weapons. Inspector Jameson stood guard over a table laden with tagged items, the crystal glasses, the brandy decanter and, most crucially, the elaborate lion's mask that Sir Edmund had worn to his final performance. The mask, Inspector. Poirot approached the table with barely contained urgency. I must examine it. Jameson frowned. The surgeons already looked it over, found nothing remarkable. The surgeon, he looked for what he expected to find. Hercule Poirot looks for what is hidden. Poirot drew on a pair of white cotton gloves with ceremonial precision. With your permission? Jameson shrugged. Be my guest. Though I don't see what you expect to find, that he fell silent as Poirot lifted the mask with exquisite care, turning it to examine the interior surface. The lion's mane of golden silk cascaded over his gloved fingers, and the snarling face seemed almost alive in the lamplight. Hastings? Poirot's voice was tight with concentration. Observe. I moved closer, peering at the mask's interior. The inside was lined with a thin layer of padding. Theatrical cotton, as Miss Webb had described, designed to cushion the elaborate construction against the wearer's face. I see the padding you mentioned. What of it? Look more closely, mon ami. Here, where the mask would press against the forehead, and here, where it would touch the temples. I squinted at the areas Poirot indicated. At first, I noticed nothing unusual, but then, as the lamplight caught the fabric at a certain angle, I saw it, a faint discoloration, a slightly darker patch against the cream-coloured cotton. There's a stain of some kind. Not a stain, Hastings, a residue. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. Something was applied to this padding, something that would be absorbed through the skin when the mask was worn. Poison, I breathed, précisément. Poirot set down the mask with reverent care. Inspector, this mask must be analysed immediately. I believe you will find traces of a contact poison, something that penetrates the skin and enters the bloodstream gradually. Jameson's ruddy face had gone pale. You're saying someone poisoned the inside of his mask? That he was dying from the moment he put it on? That is precisely what I'm saying. The brandy, the toast, the glasses, they were misdirection. Sir Edmund was murdered hours before he fell. But the symptoms, I protested. He showed no distress until after the toast. Some contact poisons are slow to manifest, Hastings. They require time to penetrate the skin, to accumulate in the bloodstream. Sir Edmund wore this mask for... Poirot turned to Jameson. How long before the toast? The ball began at 9. The toast was at 11:30. 2.5 hours, give or take. 2.5 hours. Poirot nodded gravely. Time enough for the poison to work its way into his system. The symptoms would have begun gradually. Perhaps a slight dizziness, a warmth in the face, easily attributed to champagne and exertion. By the time he drank the toast, the poison had already reached fatal levels. The brandy merely accelerated what was already inevitable. Jameson ran a hand through his thinning hair. Good God! Then whoever made this mask is our primary suspect, yes. Poirot's expression was grim. Miss Harriet Webb designed and constructed all the masks for this evening. She had access to theatrical materials, knowledge of substances that might be applied to fabric, and, most importantly, an absolute devotion to Miss Delacourt that borders on obsession. Motive? Sir Edmund Ashworth held Miss Delacourt in a prison of blackmail. He knew secrets that could destroy her career, her reputation, her very identity. For 10 years, Miss Webb has devoted herself to protecting Vivienne Delacourt. When Sir Edmund's threats became intolerable, Poirot spread his hands eloquently. She eliminated the threat. Jameson's jaw set. I'll have her arrested immediately. Un moment, Inspector. Poirot raised a cautionary hand. We must not move too hastily. The evidence, it is compelling but not yet complete. We must determine what poison was used, and whether Miss Webb had access to such a substance. Theatrical folk have access to all manner of strange chemicals, Jameson muttered. Makeup, dyes, solvents. Indeed, but murder by contact poison requires specific knowledge. Knowledge not commonly possessed by costume designers. Poirot began to pace, his grey cells visibly churning. We must also consider, if Miss Webb is our killer, why send Briggs on an errand that drew attention to her movements? Why create a window of opportunity that she herself could not have used? I frowned. What do you mean? Briggs was absent from the pantry for approximately 5 minutes. During that time, someone could have tampered with the brandy glasses, planted evidence, perhaps, to suggest the poison was administered via drink rather than mask. Poirot's eyes narrowed. If Miss Webb is clever enough to devise a murder by contact poison, she is clever enough to create misdirection. But this misdirection, it points toward her, not away. Perhaps she made a mistake, Jameson suggested. Perhaps. but Poirot's tone conveyed doubt. Or perhaps someone wishes us to believe Miss Webb is the killer. Someone who understands that her devotion to Miss Delacourt makes her the perfect scapegoat. We returned to the ballroom, where the remaining guests had grown restless in their confinement. The grandeur of the Venetian decorations now seemed tawdry in the harsh light of morning. The silk drapes wilted, the flowers drooping in their arrangements. Miss Delacour sat apart from the others, her butterfly mask discarded on the seat beside her. She looked exhausted, the famous violet eyes rimmed with shadows, her elaborate gown rumpled and stained. "Mademoiselle." Poirot approached with gentle purpose. "I must ask you more questions about Miss Webb." Vivienne looked up, her expression wary. "Harriet, what about her? How long has she been in your service?" "I told you, 10 years, since my first role at the Haymarket. And before that, what do you know of her history?" Vivienne's brow furrowed. "Very little, honestly. Harriet doesn't speak of her past. I know she trained as a seamstress somewhere in the north. Manchester, perhaps. She came to London seeking work in the theatre. Does she have family? Friends outside your theatrical circle?" "None that I know of. Harriet's life is contained. Her work, her devotion to the productions, to me." Vivienne's voice softened. "I've often thought she was lonely, but whenever I suggested she take time for herself, pursue interests of her own, she refused, said her work was all she needed. Her devotion to you, has it ever seemed excessive?" Vivienne was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I have tried not to examine it too closely, Monsieur Poirot. Harriet has been a constant in my life, the only constant, through every upheaval, every triumph, every scandal. When Edmund began his attentions, Harriet was the only one who understood what I was enduring, the only one who tried to protect me." "Protect you how?" "She urged me to leave, to walk away from Edmund's patronage, even if it meant sacrificing my career. She said no success was worth selling my soul." Vivienne's laugh was bitter. "I didn't listen. I thought I could manage Edmund, keep him at arm's length. I was wrong. And when Edmund discovered your secret, your true identity—" Vivienne's face contorted with remembered anguish. "Harriet was furious, not at me, never at me, but at Edmund. She called him a vulture, a parasite, feeding on other people's talent and pain. She said—" Vivienne hesitated. "What did she say, mademoiselle?" "She said she would see me free of him, whatever it took." Vivienne's voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought she meant she would help me find another patron. I never imagined that she might remove Edmund permanently." The tears that spilled down Vivienne's cheeks were silent, but no less genuine for their quiet fall. "Harriet loves me, Monsieur Poirot. I've always known that. Not as a friend loves, or even as family, something deeper, something I couldn't return, no matter how much I cared for her." "And this unreturned love? You believe it drove her to murder?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." Vivienne pressed her hands to her face. "Everything is falling apart. Edmund dead, Harriet suspected, my secret's about to be exposed to the world. Your secrets need not be exposed, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was surprisingly gentle. "The murder of Sir Edmund Ashworth can be solved without revealing the identity of Violet Marsh. Hercule Poirot, he is discreet." Vivienne looked up, hope flickering in her devastated eyes. "You would protect me. Even now, I would see justice done, and justice, mademoiselle, does not require the destruction of innocent lives." He paused. "But I must know everything, every secret, every hidden truth. Only then can I ensure that the right person faces judgment." We found Marcus Crane smoking furiously on the terrace, his harlequin costume abandoned in favour of a borrowed dressing gown. The dawn light caught his theatrical features, revealing the exhaustion beneath his carefully maintained facade. Monsieur Crane. Poirot joined him at the balustrade. A word, if you please. Haven't I said enough? Marcus exhaled a plume of smoke into the grey morning air. I didn't kill Edmund. I had no love for the man. But I'm not a murderer. I do not suggest you are. But I wonder, your brother Philip. He served Sir Edmund for 5 years. What do you know of his relationship with his employer? Marcus's expression shifted, something guarded entering his eyes. Philip is my brother. I won't speak against him. I do not ask you to condemn him. I ask only for truth. Poirot's gaze was penetrating. Philip told me he loved Sir Edmund, that his devotion was more than professional. The cigarette trembled slightly in Marcus's fingers. Philip is a fool. He's always been a fool. Too sensitive, too romantic, too willing to see good in people who have none. He loved a man who did not love him in return. He loved a man who used him mercilessly. Marcus's voice hardened. Edmund knew exactly how Philip felt. He exploited it for years, keeping Philip close, giving him just enough hope to maintain his loyalty, but never, ever returning his affection. He crushed his cigarette against the balustrade. I begged Philip to leave. Threatened, pleaded, practically dragged him away. He always went back. And now Sir Edmund is dead. Philip is free. Marcus went very still. If you're suggesting my brother killed Edmund, I suggest nothing. I observe patterns. Poirot's voice was calm but relentless. Philip loved Edmund. Edmund treated him cruelly. Such treatment, over years, might transform love into something darker. Resentment, hatred, a desire for revenge. Philip isn't capable of murder. Everyone is capable of murder, Monsieur Crane, given sufficient provocation. Poirot turned to face him directly. But perhaps you know something that exonerates your brother. Perhaps you can tell me where he was when the mask was being prepared, when the poison was being applied. Marcus's face was a study in conflict, loyalty warring with fear, love battling suspicion. Finally, he spoke. 3 days ago. Philip came to my rooms in a terrible state. He'd had some kind of confrontation with Edmund. Wouldn't tell me the details, but I could see he'd been weeping. He said he couldn't go on, that something had to change. Something had to change, Poirot repeated softly. An interesting phrase. He didn't mean murder. He couldn't have meant murder. But Marcus's voice lacked conviction. Philip loved Edmund. Whatever Edmund did to him, Philip still loved him. Love and murder, Monsieur Crane, are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, Poirot's eyes grew distant, thoughtful. They are often the closest of companions. He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Marcus Crane alone on the terrace, his face grey in the dawn light. In the corridor, Poirot paused, his expression grave. The web, Hastings, it grows more tangled. Miss Webb with her obsessive devotion, Philip Crane with his broken heart. Each had motive. Each had opportunity. Each might have applied poison to that mask. But which one did? That, mon ami, is the question the little grey cells must answer. He resumed walking, his pace measured but purposeful. There is one more thread to follow. The mask itself. Who had access to it after Miss Webb completed her work? The answer, I suspect, will reveal our killer. He paused at the door to the evidence room, his hand on the knob. The drawing-room revelation approaches, Hastings. But first, one final piece of evidence must be secured. One final truth must emerge from the shadows. His eyes gleamed with the light of imminent discovery. Come, the game nears its end, and Hercule Poirot is ready to unmask the murderer. Chapter 6. The Final Curtain. The morning sun had fully risen by the time Poirot assembled the suspects in Sir Edmund Ashworth's grand drawing room. It was a space designed to impress. Gilded mirrors, ancestral portraits, furniture upholstered in cream silk. But the atmosphere now was one of exhaustion and dread rather than elegance. I took my customary position near the fireplace, notebook in hand, watching as the players in this tragic drama arranged themselves about the room. Vivienne Delacourt sat in a wing-back chair near the window, her violet eyes hollow, her famous beauty dimmed by grief and fear. Marcus Crane stood behind her, his theatrical bravado stripped away, leaving only a tired, worried man. His brother Philip occupied a straight-backed chair near the door, his pale face a mask of careful neutrality. Sylvia Morehouse had claimed the settee, her peacock feathers long since discarded, her sharp features drawn with fatigue, and something that might have been satisfaction. And Harriet Webb, quiet, devoted Harriet, sat apart from the others in a simple wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Inspector Jameson stood by the door, his notebook ready, his expression conveying both skepticism and curiosity. Poirot positioned himself before the marble fireplace, his small figure somehow commanding the attention of everyone present. He had changed into a fresh suit, immaculate as always, and his moustache had been restored to its full magnificence. His green eyes swept the room with the calm authority of a conductor preparing to lead an orchestra through a demanding symphony. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "We are gathered to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath masks and misdirection. The murder of Sir Edmund Ashworth was not a crime of impulse, but a carefully orchestrated performance. A drama within a drama, if you will." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "Last night, Sir Edmund Ashworth collapsed and died before 200 witnesses. The assumption was immediate: poison in the brandy. The toast, the crystal glasses, the theatrical timing all pointed toward a crime committed in plain sight. But the assumption was wrong." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The brandy was not poisoned. The glasses were clean. Sir Edmund Ashworth was dying from the moment he entered the ballroom. Dying from the moment he placed upon his face the magnificent lion's mask that had been crafted specifically for him." A murmur rippled through the assembled suspects. Harriet Webb's hands tightened almost imperceptibly in her lap. The mask, it was the murder weapon, a contact poison, applied to the interior padding, absorbed through the skin over the course of the evening. By the time Sir Edmund raised his glass for the fatal toast, his fate was already sealed. The brandy merely hastened what was inevitable. "This is absurd," Sylvia Morehouse interjected, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You're saying someone poisoned his mask? That he was wearing his own death for hours without knowing it?" "Précisément, mademoiselle. A most elegant method, and one that required intimate knowledge of theatrical materials, access to the mask before the ball, and a motive powerful enough to justify such calculated murder." Poirot's gaze swept the room once more. "Let us consider who possessed these requirements. The obvious suspect, of course, is Miss Harriet Webb, the costume designer who created the mask, who had access to theatrical chemicals, who possessed an obsessive devotion to Miss Delacourt and an open hatred of Sir Edmund." Harriet's face remained impassive, but I saw her fingers press more tightly together. Miss Webb had motive, Sir Edmund's blackmail of her beloved Vivienne. She had means, her knowledge of fabrics, chemicals, substances that might penetrate the skin. And she had opportunity. The mask passed through her hands before it reached Sir Edmund. Furthermore, Poirot continued, his voice hardening slightly, Miss Webb sent the footman Thomas Briggs on an errand shortly before the toast. An errand that left the brandy glasses unattended for several minutes. This created a window during which the glasses might have been tampered with. Misdirection to draw attention away from the true method of murder. Vivienne Delacourt made a small, wounded sound. "Harriet, no, I did not kill him." Harriet's voice was quiet but firm. "I hated Edmund Ashworth. I wished him dead 1,000 times, but I did not murder him." "And yet the evidence points toward you, mademoiselle." Poirot spread his hands. The mask, the errand, the motive. The obsessive love that might drive a woman to any extreme. Obsessive love. Harriet's laugh was bitter. "Yes, I love Vivienne. I have loved her for 10 years. Silently, hopelessly, knowing she could never return my feelings. But that love has never driven me to violence. It has driven me only to service, to protection, to ensuring her success and safety by every legitimate means available." "And illegitimate means?" "I would die for Vivienne Delacourt." Harriet's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "But I would not kill for her. Not like this. Not in a way that would inevitably lead back to me, that would destroy the very person I sought to protect." Poirot nodded slowly. "An interesting point, mademoiselle. Indeed, this is the question that troubled the little grey cells from the beginning. If you are clever enough to devise murder by contact poison, why create misdirection that points toward yourself? Why send Briggs on an errand that draws attention to your movements?" He began to pace, his small steps precise and measured. "The answer, I realized, is that you did not create this misdirection. Someone else did. Someone who understood that your devotion to Miss Delacourt made you the perfect scapegoat, the obvious suspect who would draw attention away from the true killer." "Then who?" Marcus Crane demanded. "If not Harriet, then who?" Poirot stopped pacing. His eyes found Philip Crane, still seated by the door, his pale face now several shades paler. "Let us consider another suspect. Philip Crane, Sir Edmund's secretary for 5 years. A young man of education and refinement, reduced to fetching and carrying for a cruel master. A young man who loved Sir Edmund desperately, hopelessly, and who was used and discarded like all of Edmund's possessions." Philip's composure cracked. I couldn't, 3 days before the ball. You had a confrontation with Sir Edmund. Your brother Marcus saw the aftermath. You were weeping, distraught, declaring that something had to change." Poirot's voice was gentle but relentless. "What happened in that confrontation, Monsieur Crane?" Philip's hands trembled visibly. Edmund told me he was finished with me, that he had grown bored with my devotion. He laughed at me, said I had been useful, but my usefulness was at an end. He dismissed you. He destroyed me." Philip's voice cracked. 5 years I gave him. 5 years of love, of loyalty, of debasing myself for the smallest scrap of his attention, and he threw me away like rubbish. "A powerful motive for murder," Poirot observed. "Love transformed into hatred, devotion curdled into revenge." "I wanted him dead," Philip admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "God help me, I wanted him dead, but I didn't kill him. I couldn't have. I don't know anything about poisons, about theatrical materials. I wouldn't know how to—" "Ah, but that is where you are wrong, Monsieur Crane." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "As Sir Edmund's secretary, you had access to his private papers, his correspondence, his research. Philip went very still. Sir Edmund, he was a collector of art, of people, of information. Among his papers I discovered correspondence with a chemist in Vienna, a specialist in rare toxins. Sir Edmund had been researching contact poisons for months, not to commit murder, but to protect himself from the enemies his cruelty had created. Edmund was paranoid, Philip said slowly. He believed someone would try to poison him eventually. He wanted to understand the methods to guard against them. And you, as his secretary, would have read this correspondence, would have understood the methods described therein. Philip's face contorted with anguish. Yes, I read the letters. I knew about contact poisons, but that doesn't mean I use the knowledge. No, Poirot agreed softly. It does not. He resumed his pacing, and I noticed that his path was gradually bringing him closer to the settee, where Sylvia Morehouse sat, watching the proceedings with glittering eyes. We have established that both Miss Webb and Monsieur Philip Crane had motive, means, and opportunity. Both had reason to hate Sir Edmund. Both might have wished him dead. Poirot paused, but the little grey cells, they are troubled by inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? Jameson asked from his position by the door. Miss Webb's misdirection points toward herself, illogical for a clever killer. Monsieur Philip Crane's knowledge of poisons came from Sir Edmund's own research that might be discovered, that might implicate him. Poirot shook his head. Neither of these suspects behaves as a calculating murderer should behave. Then you're saying neither of them did it? Sylvia Morehouse's voice dripped with skepticism. How convenient! I am saying, mademoiselle, that we have been looking at this crime from the wrong perspective. Poirot stopped directly before her, his small figure somehow looming despite his stature. We have focused on those who had obvious motives to kill Sir Edmund, but we have overlooked those who had reasons to ensure that someone else would be blamed for the crime. Sylvia's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're implying. Do you not? Then let me be explicit. Poirot's voice hardened. You, Mademoiselle Morehouse, were Sir Edmund's lover for 5 years. You believed yourself destined to be his wife, his partner, his equal. When he cast you aside for Vivienne Delacourt, you were not merely hurt, you were humiliated, publicly, devastatingly. Old news, Sylvia said coldly. Everyone knows I despised Edmund after what he did to me. That hardly makes me unique in this room. No, but your response to that humiliation was unique. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. This letter was found among Sir Edmund's private correspondence. It is dated 3 weeks ago, addressed to you, and it concerns a rather significant financial matter. Sylvia's composure flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. Sir Edmund, in his will, had originally left you a substantial bequest, compensation perhaps for your years of service to his ambitions. But 3 weeks ago, he informed you that he had changed his will, that your bequest had been reduced to nothing, that every penny of his fortune would go to— Poirot paused, consulting the letter. The only woman who has ever truly understood me. Vivienne, my greatest discovery. That's a lie! Sylvia's voice rose sharply. Edmund would never. The will has been verified, mademoiselle. Every penny to Miss Delacour. You receive nothing. The room fell silent. Vivienne Delacour's face had gone white with shock. I didn't know, she whispered. I had no idea Edmund had changed his will. No, mademoiselle, you did not. Poirot turned back to Sylvia. But Miss Morehouse knew, and this knowledge transformed her hatred from mere resentment into desperate action. This is absurd." But Sylvia's voice had lost its certainty. "Even if what you say is true, I don't know anything about contact poisons. I couldn't have—" "Could you not? Let me tell you what I believe happened." Poirot's voice took on the rhythmic cadence of a storyteller approaching his climax. "When you learned of the changed will, you realized that Sir Edmund's death, before he could change his mind again, would leave you with nothing, while your hated rival inherited everything. Your jealousy, already bitter, became poisonous. You determined to kill Sir Edmund, but more than that, you determined to ensure that Vivienne Delacourt would be blamed for the crime." "The threatening letters?" I interjected, suddenly understanding. "The ones Miss Delacour received before the ball were sent by Miss Morehouse, yes." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Letters designed to suggest that Miss Delacourt had enemies, that she was in danger. Letters that would later be reinterpreted as evidence of her own guilt, as though she had fabricated threats to cover a planned murder." "You have no proof of that," Sylvia said, but her voice trembled. "The letters smelled of theatrical grease paint. An odd detail, unless the sender wished to suggest a theatrical connection, to point suspicion toward the costume designer who worked so closely with Miss Delacour." Poirot drew another paper from his pocket. "But you made a mistake, mademoiselle. The newspapers from which you cut the threatening words, they include a regional publication, the Manchester Evening Chronicle, a paper not commonly available in London, but readily accessible to someone with connections in that city." Sylvia's face had gone grey. "You trained as an actress in Manchester, did you not? Before you came to London, before you met Sir Edmund. You maintain connections there, including, I discovered, a cousin who works as a chemist's assistant. This is circumstantial nonsense. Your cousin specializes in industrial chemicals, including substances that can be absorbed through the skin." Poirot's voice was implacable. "When I contacted the Manchester Constabulary this morning, they confirmed that a quantity of such a substance had been reported missing from your cousin's workplace 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was absolute. "The timeline, it is clear." Poirot continued. 3 weeks ago, you learned of the changed will. You contacted your cousin, obtained the poison. You sent the threatening letters, establishing a pattern of danger around Miss Delacourt. And then you waited for the masquerade ball, the perfect venue for anonymous murder." "But the mask," Marcus Crane objected. "How could Sylvia have poisoned the mask? She didn't have access to it." "Ah, but she did." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The masks were stored in the dressing rooms before the ball. Miss Webb completed them 3 days in advance, and then left them unattended while she attended to other preparations. Anyone with access to the theatre could have tampered with them." "I saw Sylvia," Philip Crane said slowly, his voice filled with dawning realization. 2 days before the ball, she was leaving the theatre through the stage door. I thought nothing of it at the time. She often visits to observe rehearsals, to torment Vivienne with her presence. But on this occasion she was not observing. Poirot fixed Sylvia with his piercing gaze. She was applying poison to the interior of Sir Edmund's mask, and she was planting evidence, a gold silk thread, caught in the padding, that would point toward Harriet Webb, the costume designer who worked exclusively with that material. Harriet's gasp was audible. The thread! I wondered where it had gone. A spool went missing from my workbench. Stolen by Miss Morehouse. Planted in the mask to implicate you. Poirot shook his head. A clever plan, but not clever enough. For the little grey cells, they see what others miss. Sylvia Morehouse rose from the settee, Her composure finally shattered. Her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. "He deserved it!" The words exploded from her like venom. 5 years I gave Edmund Ashworth. 5 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of enduring his cruelties because I believed he would marry me. And then she appeared, her finger jabbed toward Vivienne, this nobody from nowhere. And suddenly I was nothing, discarded, forgotten, replaced. "So you killed him," Poirot said quietly. "I gave him exactly what he deserved." Sylvia's laugh was wild, unhinged. Death wearing a disguise, just like the letter said. His own mask, his own vanity, his own obsession with theatrical spectacle. I used it all against him. And you attempted to frame Miss Webb, to destroy Miss Delacourt. They deserved to suffer too. Harriet with her pathetic devotion, Vivienne with her stolen success. Let them hang for Edmund's murder. It would be a fitting end to this whole sordid drama. Sylvia's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "But you had to interfere, didn't you? The great Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells." "Justice, mademoiselle. It does not sleep." Poirot nodded to Inspector Jameson. "Inspector, I believe you have heard sufficient confession." Jameson moved forward, handcuffs ready. "Sylvia Morehouse, I'm arresting you for the murder of Sir Edmund Ashworth." As the inspector led her away, Sylvia Morehouse turned one final time, her eyes finding Vivienne Delacourt. "You think you've won," she hissed, "but Edmund's fortune comes with Edmund's secrets. Enjoy your inheritance, Violet Marsh. Enjoy it while it lasts." The door closed behind her, and the room exhaled. Chapter 7. After the applause. 3 days later, I sat with Poirot in his immaculate sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions, the November fog pressing against the windows like a grey velvet curtain. A fire crackled in the grate, and Poirot cradled a cup of his preferred tisane, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "The case is closed," I remarked, setting down my newspaper. The headlines had been full of little else. "Society beauty arrested for masked murder," the sensationalist press proclaimed. "Jealousy and poison at Belgravia ball." "The case is closed," Poirot agreed. "And justice, it has been served. I confess, I suspected Harriet Webb until nearly the end. Her devotion to Miss Delacourt seemed so absolute, so obsessive, as Philip Crane described it. And therein lay the danger, mon ami." Poirot set down his cup with precise care. "We see what we expect to see. Miss Webb's devotion made her the obvious suspect. Too obvious, as it transpired. The true killer understood this. She constructed her crime specifically to exploit our assumptions. Sylvia Morehouse," I shook my head, "consumed by jealousy and resentment. Consumed, yes, but also clever, dangerously clever." Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. She understood the theatrical world intimately. She knew that in a realm of masks and performances, the greatest deception is the one that hides in plain sight. The contact poison was brilliant, I admitted reluctantly. Sir Edmund dying gradually, invisibly, while everyone watched. No one suspected the mask because no one thinks of clothing as a murder weapon. Précisément. And the misdirection, the threatening letters, the errand that drew Briggs away from the glasses, the planted thread, all designed to focus attention on the wrong method and the wrong suspect. Poirot sighed softly. Miss Morehouse would have succeeded Hastings had she not made one critical error. The newspaper from Manchester. The newspaper, yes. A small detail, so small that most investigators would overlook it entirely, but the little grey cells, they notice everything. He tapped his egg-shaped head with satisfaction. When cutting words from newspapers, one does not think carefully about the source. One uses what is available. And what was available to Miss Morehouse was a paper from her past, a connection she had forgotten, but which I had not. The doorbell rang, and moments later George appeared in the doorway. "Miss Delacourt and Miss Webb to see you, sir." Poirot rose as the two women entered. Vivienne Delacourt had recovered some of her famous composure, though shadows lingered beneath her violet eyes. She wore a simple grey dress, mourning, I supposed, though whether for Sir Edmund or for the life she had known remained unclear. Beside her, Harriet Webb moved with quiet dignity, her plain features softened by something that might have been relief. "Monsieur Poirot." Vivienne extended her gloved hand. "We came to thank you, and to say goodbye." "Goodbye, mademoiselle. I'm leaving London." Vivienne settled into the offered chair, her movements graceful despite her evident weariness. "Edmund's estate. His solicitors have confirmed the will. Everything comes to me. The houses, the investments, the theatrical holdings." She laughed softly without humour. "I spent years as his prisoner, and now I inherit his kingdom." "A bitter irony," Poirot observed. "Bitter, yes, but also freeing." Vivienne's eyes met his. "With Edmund's fortune, I can rebuild my life on my own terms. No more patronage, no more obligations, no more masks. And your secret? The identity of Violet Marsh." Vivienne glanced at Harriet, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Sylvia shouted it for all to hear as she was arrested. By now, every newspaper in London knows that Vivienne Delacourt is a fiction, that the celebrated actress is actually a runaway from Cornwall with a buried past. She smiled, and there was strength in it now, not fragility. "I expected ruin. I expected scandal. Instead, I find that the public is fascinated. The mystery of my origins has only enhanced my appeal." "The mask becomes the face," Poirot murmured, "and the face becomes the legend." "Something like that." Vivienne rose, and Harriet rose with her, two women moving in unconscious synchronization, bound by a decade of shared history. "I'm taking an extended holiday. The continent, perhaps. Somewhere warm and quiet, where I can remember who I was before all this." "And you, Miss Webb?" I asked. "Will you accompany her?" Harriet's plain face flushed slightly. "If Vivienne wishes it." "I do." Vivienne's hand found Harriet's, their fingers intertwining with easy familiarity. I spent 10 years accepting Harriet's devotion without understanding it, without acknowledging what it truly meant. She squeezed Harriet's hand gently. "I cannot promise to return her feelings in the way she deserves, but I can promise to stop pretending they don't exist." Harriet's eyes glistened. "That is enough. That has always been enough." Poirot watched them with an expression of rare tenderness. "Love, mesdames, it takes many forms. Not all of them are spoken, not all of them are returned, but all of them are worthy of honour." Vivienne nodded slowly. "You are a remarkable man, Monsieur Poirot. You saw through every disguise, except the ones that deserved to remain hidden. Hercule Poirot sees what is necessary to see, nothing more." He offered a small bow. "Go with my blessing, mesdames, and remember, the past, it need not define the future. Only we can do that." After they departed, Poirot stood by the window, watching the fog swirl through the Mayfair streets. His reflection floated ghost-like in the glass, superimposed upon the grey afternoon. "A satisfying conclusion," I ventured. "Satisfying, yes, and yet—" He turned from the window, his expression pensive. "The case, it troubles me still, Hastings, not the solution, That was clear enough once the little grey cells perceived the pattern. No, what troubles me is the tragedy beneath the crime. The tragedy? Consider, mon ami. Sir Edmund Ashworth, a man of wealth and influence, destroyed by his own cruelty. He collected people like objects, discarded them when they bored him, and never once considered that his possessions might possess feelings of their own. Poirot shook his head slowly. Sylvia Morehouse loved him, truly loved him, however twisted that love became. Philip Crane loved him. Even Vivienne, in her way, was bound to him by something more complex than mere obligation. And he valued none of them. He valued only himself, his desires, his pleasures, his power. Poirot sighed. In the end, it was not poison that killed Sir Edmund Ashworth. It was his own blindness, his inability to see the hearts he trampled, the wounds he inflicted, the hatred he cultivated with every casual cruelty. You almost sound as though you pity him. I pity anyone who dies without understanding why. Poirot returned to his chair, settling into its embrace with weary grace. Death wears a disguise, the threatening letter said. And so it did, the disguise of a magnificent mask, crafted with care, worn with pride. Sir Edmund never knew that his vanity had become his executioner. He reached for his tisane, now cooled, and raised it in a silent toast. To truth, Hastings, which wears no mask, which needs no disguise, which alone endures when all performances have ended and all curtains have fallen. I raised my own cup in response. To truth, I agreed. Outside, the fog continued to press against the windows of Whitehaven Mansions. But inside, in the warm glow of the fire, there was only the quiet satisfaction of justice served and mysteries solved. The curtain had fallen on the tragedy of Sir Edmund Ashworth. And Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells at rest, permitted himself a small, contented smile. The end.